thanks so much for coming. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with a quick 10-minute refresh on what ID means, what issues are really pressing in our industry right now, and then we'll have a panel and debate the good and the bad of all of it. So let's start with a fresher. We talk a lot about cookies and third-party cookies and first-party identifiers, but a lot of people don't kind of step back and think about where the cookie comes from, because the cookie dates to the very beginning of internet browsing. And the reason cookies exist is so publishers can not make you sign in every minute and can start to track the content that's available on websites to users. So this concept of first-party cookie is something that's placed by a publisher on your browser to allow you, in theory, to have a better browsing experience on that site. So if you're on a news site, you'll see articles targeted to you. You won't see articles you've already seen, things like that. Then came the concept of a third-party cookie, which is a cookie placed by someone other than the website you're on. And that's the cookies most of us know and love as advertising cookies. They're placed by buyers, by exchanges, by measurement companies, by viewability companies, by pretty much everybody. And to give a sense of how widespread this is, during this panel in the next hour, several 100 million cookies are going to be dropped around the world while we're talking. So this is a widespread thing that's used very commonly. And everyone in this room, depending on your settings on your browser, you probably have hundreds of third-party cookies on your machine right now as we speak. And they're sleeping at the moment, but they will wake up and do crazy things. So cookies are something that exist in our industry for a lot of reasons. The duopoly is growing in France. Walled gardens like Facebook and Google, who don't necessarily have cookie dependencies because they have logged-in users. So the issue of how we do tracking is kind of existential to the independent publisher community, and our ability to come up with a scalable long-term solution to identity is critical to our survival. So if there's one thing for you to take away from this session is this is an urgent problem, and you have to act quickly because we are going to get ourselves into trouble as an industry if we can't properly provide good ad experiences to our users. So I think I've given 10 speeches on identity in the last 3 weeks. I give like 3 a week now, which is one of the reasons why we have to solve the identity problem so I can stop giving these speeches all the time. And the most common title you see is, third-party cookie is dead, it's over, it's gone. It's not. Third-party cookie is not dead. Why would I say that? Because right now, just in Rubicon, we've got about 2.5 billion third-party cookies circulated in the world. Dead things don't have 2.5 billion versions of themselves. And that's just Rubicon. So the third-party cookie continues to be critical to our industry. They are placed every day in our ecosystem. And without it, a lot of things would change. They're not just tracking devices. Third-party cookies are used for single sign-on cases. They're used for pretty much all of the things that we do in an industry requires third-party identifiers. So the issue isn't the third-party cookie itself, it's the way they're used and a lack of governance over the process. So more and more browsers are starting to put restrictions on this process. Obviously, we know what Apple has done with Safari. We know what Firefox has done. And Google is introducing a set of user controls, trying to explain to a user what a cookie is. That's going to be an interesting attempt. But anyway, they're going to put controls in place that will start to place restrictions on third-party IDs. So the use of third-party IDs is going to change. It is going to evolve. But they're not gone as of right now. So we should keep that in mind. So one of the reasons they're not dead yet is because all of the alternatives have issues. If the third-party cookie were to go away, what are the things that could replace it? What could we use as an industry to properly align advertising messages to user preferences? And there's really 4 competing alternatives. The first is browser IDs. Browser IDs are great because that puts a resettable value on a web browser the same way we do mobile devices and CTV. So as we move towards mobile app and CTV, those use resettable device IDs. And if we had browser IDs, then we'd have the same system for everything. We'd have one ubiquitous system in our industry. Wouldn't that be amazing? Of course, that'll never happen because a sensible thing in advertising is rare. But the problem with browser IDs is essentially in the hands of 3 companies. And none of those 3 companies necessarily care all that much about what we think. So, and even if Google decided to put a browser ID on Chrome, we probably wouldn't trust it anyway, and we would still want to have a backup plan. So browser IDs are attractive. There's lots of good things about them, but there certainly are challenges. Single sign-on is a super, super popular thing in Europe right now, led by European Net ID in Germany, and some similar efforts that are starting to take place here in France. It's a great option. Signed-in users is the nirvana of our industry. It's a consent moment, and it gives you the ability to have a persistent first-party ID for those users. The problem with single sign-on is it just doesn't scale. If you're a publisher and you try to get signed-on users, first of all, you're going to have to deny them access to your content. And secondly, if you get 30, 40, 50% in a lot of cases, that's a good result. And you can't have a monetization solution that ignores half of your users. So the scale of single sign-on has been an issue. Context. Context is becoming more and more attractive, especially in cases where users opt out. But we've got years and years of work to do to effectively use and ingest content. Contextual signals in our industry, because we stopped doing that like 10 years ago. So context is potentially a good solution, but we're years away from having a good answer to it. And finally, first-party IDs. First-party IDs is the ability to write the ID in the publisher domain. So using a first-party cookie for persistence. This is really the best option, but it requires publisher action. Hence the call to action for everyone here that we have to start acting and working together to develop a solution. So what's a universal ID? We're going to talk about this. And the idea behind a universal ID is quite simple. Today, we drop hundreds of identifiers on users' browsers. Now the idea is we'll replace those hundreds of identifiers with one single common identifier that we'll all use. So the way I always put it is, it's a cookie, but it's the last one, I promise. We'll never put another one after this one. It's the last cookie you'll ever see. This is, to me, the most necessary step towards evolving our industry. If we can't solve this problem, we're all doomed. So having a single universal ID, moving away from this model where we all have our own proprietary IDs to a single common standard. And maybe it's more than one, maybe it's 2 or 3, but it's not 20, and it's not 300. And so we have to reach agreement on what identifiers are allowed and make sense. And from my perspective, there's only one entity that should decide what IDs get written to a page, and that's the publisher itself. So the publisher has to take control of this problem. So independent solutions are critical for our industry. We have to come together and collaborate on a way of doing this. We believe that open source is a big part of the solution going forward. I'm the chairman of Prisma.org. Prisma.org is trying very much to allow easy ways for publishers to control the IDs that are written on the page. And through this concept of an ID module, you can select the IDs that you want to be written to your page. So what we'd like to see is a publisher-centric, community-driven approach to identity. Publishers control the IDs written on the page. We collaborate on the correct use of IDs and work together. And IDs are viewed as community property, not competitive assets. We shouldn't be weaponizing identity for competitive purposes. We should be cooperating to create a common model that we all own together. In Prisma.org, we've been working really hard to make it easy for universal IDs to be used. We started by giving publishers control by putting user modules into Prebid, so you can select from any of a number of IDs and enable those on your page with a simple one-click thing. We have now added first-party identification into Prebid, so you can write an identity in the first party but transmit a third-party value to your buyers. This is a big advancement in terms of applying some level of persistence to the third-party model, and over time, we want Prebid to enable publisher choice and restrict the ability of third-party cookies to be written over the top. This is how this works. We call it the user ID module, and there are plenty of modules we have out there. I apologize if yours is not on there, because when we started doing this, we had one ID module. It was TradeDesk. Now we have 14. And at some point, there's going to be too many. So we've got a bunch of modules here. You can select whatever modules you want. You can write your cookie into the first party. And then whatever IDs you want transmitted are transmitted to the different buyers or bidders in the wrapper. So this is what we're trying to do in pre-bid. Give publishers control over what IDs are written and allow standardized IDs to be transmitted to all players in the ecosystem. Finally, what we want to do is enable IDs to be mapped to deals for easy purchases by buyers. Because right now, buyers are measuring audiences and segments using their own proprietary identities. We want to move them to standard ways of doing this. So we've developed methods to take first-party IDs, whatever they may be, single sign-on, digitrust, et cetera, map those to deals in exchanges, and allow buyers to buy deals, not users. So this is going to help advance privacy, but it really requires universal IDs. We have to have universal IDs to do all the cool things that we want to do going forward. So what are some takeaways to think about during our discussion? One question is, how do we make it a priority? We've been talking about this for 3 years and doing nothing, and we're starting to get to the point where we're affecting our ability to monetize as an industry, and we're affecting our ability to innovate. So do something. Leave this room and yell at somebody or say something mean or say something nice, but do something to advance the move towards a universal identity. We have to think about who should own this ID. Should it be for-profit? Should it be nonprofit? Should it be an industry association? Should it be a company with a vested interest? You know, who are the groups that can lead us? And certainly, being here at the IAB is a natural place to look for leadership and for consensus and collaboration on this topic. Cool. So that's the intro, and now we can move on to the heated discussion.
Thank you, Tom. So we're going to have a quick conversation with a number of panelists. For those who don't know me, and you guys can take a seat in a second here. My name is Ben Dick. I'm the Director of Product at IAB Tech Lab, and I'll be moderating this panel. By the way, just a quick PSA. We have 2 mics for 4 people, so we're going to have to kind of do a passing situation here. I figured we'd just start off by quickly introducing myself. Tom, I think everyone knows you at this point. Paul, do you want to start?
Right. I'm Paul Caucheteux. I work at Prisma Media as responsible for the Programmatic sales house.
And Paul Leperchey, Head of Consulting within Publicis Epsilon.
And again, I'm Ben Dick, and I look after product at IAB Tech Lab. Just kind of kicking things off, I think Tom provided a very solid lay of the land. Although I got to say, Tom, kind of a low blow not listing digitrust in your module slide there. The only one that was not listed, you know. So, especially at our own conference, right? Come on. But joking aside, no, that was a fantastic overview. Thank you for putting that together. I think that, generally speaking, there's been a lot of confusion about standardized IDs more broadly. The handful of options that are out there, they're all generally trying to solve slightly different problems in very kind of different technical ways. So Tom, would it be possible to quickly just kind of summarize or paraphrase kind of the lay of the land as you see it, across digitrust ID, unified ID, IDL, et cetera?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion between the different IDs. I look at it as IDL, ID5, those types of IDs are device graphs designed to apply data and first-party information to an ID. That's different from IDs that are written on the page as master values. And really the options for master IDs are the TradeDesk, adserver.org ID, digitrust, and maybe ID5 to a degree. There are no other options out there. So when it comes to universal ID that can be written on the page, it has to be administered by and writable by an entity. And that's where, I think that's where the universal ID needs to focus. Once that ID is in place, that will enable people like LiveRamp and all kinds of, and LiveIntent, all kinds of device graph folks to kind of come up with, browser to mobile mapping and household attribution for CTV and all the cool targeting and attribution and segmentation that they do. But I think we sometimes talk about those device graph guys like they're ID providers, and they're really not. Yep. And I think if you look at the lay of the land on universal ID, there's the IAB Tech Lab with digitrust, which is which is doing all kinds of cool stuff. Then you've got the ADTECH Consortium in the US, which has no publishers on it.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of SSPs and DSPs, and LiveRamp is in that as well. It's a relatively small group that I don't consider to be representative. It certainly has a good charter, but from a number of members' perspective, I mean, there's a ton more people involved in things like the IAB. Those are really the only global folks looking at a universal ID space. There's a bunch of regional activities, but those are really the key ones.
Great, thanks. It's kind of open question for the group here, but Tom mentioned kind of throughout the presentation that this is not exactly a matter of technical challenges that we're facing. It's more about cooperation. Would you guys agree with that sentiment as representatives of the sell side and the buy side? Why are people not cooperating at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. So first thing, it's a really complicated topic. So you need some expertise inside publishers and agencies to be able to tackle this issue. The second thing, which is really important, is that it's quite hard as well to know for sure now which solution or which solutions will be like the most durable and the most accepted by the market. So as a publisher today, the goal is to test out as many solutions as possible, see what gets adoption among buyers, among AdTech, among publishers. But it's really early to determine like which choice we're going to make as a solution, as a universal ID inside the publishers.
And Paul, you guys are in essence looking at fill rate and clearing CPMs as the KPIs,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. And then another Paul. From the buy side perspective, what are you guys looking at as well? I mean, obviously, audience reach, scale. What are the kind of the key metrics that you're evaluating to understand which ID solution you're best kind of aligned with?
Well, for the moment, I don't think there is a big change. We are still buying through the classical process. But if we see a real drop-off regarding the volume of third-party cookies on the open web, then we will move forward more and more on walled garden, meaning the money will come more and more with Google and Facebook, who have the capabilities to answer to clients' objective, meaning client knowledge, the way we can address in an effective way the different audiences, plus the way we can measure the performance. Well, this is all about money finally, and on our side, on the buy side, we do not want to get a lot more dependency to the walled garden. So we, as an actor of this process, we really need a new infrastructure coming from the open web.
So we've established there's a number of different kind of technical approaches to creating some kind of unified ID. I'm curious, Tom, question for you. Do you see one kind of technology winning out across the board, or do you foresee a more realistic future where there's a handful of kind of blessed IDs that the marketplace can choose from?
I think there'll be a handful. There can't be only one because it's just too much dependency on that single value. However, like in pre-bid, we started this concept of an ID module. You can build a module and plug it in and activate that in your wrapper. And we had 1 and 2 and 3, and now we have 14, and pretty soon we're going to have 30. And at some point, you have 500 universal IDs. So how many is too many? And I'll tell you, 10 is too many, 5 is too many. We need a couple. We need alternatives, and I think there should be a kind of a public, non-profit, collaborative alternative, maybe a private alternative or two. So we probably should have more than one, but at some point we need to standardize on what values we use, and publishers are going to have to actively control that process, and buyers are going to have to use that ID. It's the buyers going to have to give up, the IDs they're used to using if we're going to be successful.
And on our side, maybe we do not want another walled garden to raise. That's why we do not want, private companies to own this new ID, those multiple IDs. That's why it should be a common, common good.
Yeah, I could talk to that because we don't have any representatives of the private ID community on the panel. But here's their point of view, and I see some. I tend to be like you. I think this is a community asset, and I don't want some for-profit entity controlling my ID space. But the argument they'll make, and TradeDesk would make this as well, is that you can't, managing an ID is work. There's opt-outs, and there's storage, and there's writing IDs, and there's support, and all this stuff, and you can't have a bunch of hippie bureaucrats, you know, doing that. You need to have a profit motive and an incentive and a vested interest in doing it, and, you know, it's hard to hire engineers to work for some, like, charitable organization. Well, I do see that as a challenge. My personal view is we have to find a way to let community ownership work and have collaboration work. But that's the argument that they make, is this is not simple, and you have to invest in it. So either you let a for-profit entity do it, or everybody here spends time not, you know, hanging out at the beach, working on this stuff. Those are our only options.
Yep. So the elephant in the room here, and Tom, you mentioned this in your presentation as well, is that we're operating with third-party cookies in an environment where third-party cookies are largely being deprecated by browsers, with Safari and Firefox being the most kind of draconian approach to that, whereas kind of Microsoft Edge and Chrome have big question marks on them. We don't know exactly what the time frame looks like on their own treatment of third-party cookies. Outside of just a few kind of minor updates that were announced at the Chrome Development Summit a week or two ago. So, you know, question for the group is, you know, is there a time limit here? Do we have a specific window within which we need to act now in order to potentially expand that time horizon before third-party cookies are just gone forever? Or is that just a false assumption in the first place, that third-party cookies will go away? Can Chrome kind of politically and commercially operate an environment with third-party cookies?
So what I can say for the publisher's perspective is that this quarter, like, is the quarter we're pushing the button on. What does it mean? It means that we're, like, deeply studying what's going on in this specific part of the ecosystem, and we're actually internally for now building solutions to address those issues. So it could be what happens where we cannot track anything, so what advertising solutions we can bring our clients when it's basically a dead space in terms of tracking. What can we do in terms of IDs, obviously, and what other things we can do for the future. So I think we're gonna come up with solutions beginning 2020. But these are going to be first steps. When will be the time where, like, the market will massively shift to several solutions? This is something we all don't know in this room for now, for sure.
I think that it's urgent. And if we don't do something in the next 6 months, the regulations are going to continue to get more draconian, and the pressure on Chrome to act is going to continue to mount, both internally and externally within Google. Here's the thing. Right now, there's all these, there's GDPR, there's CCPA, there's lots of things trying to restrict, to promote privacy for users. There's 300, 400, 500 cookies on your browser. Imagine if we standardized on 2, and there's only 2 third-party IDs on your browser. Do you think there'd be a huge movement to get rid of those 2? No, it would be an entirely different situation. It's within our control to regulate ourselves, to get down to a reasonable number of IDs that the activists are gonna, once you get down to 2, the reason to pour into the streets and, and protest goes away. I mean, you imagine going to that meeting where they debate getting rid of the 2 IDs on your browser. It's a non-meeting. We have the ability to solve this problem. All we have to do is do it. If we don't, then yes, they're gonna all go away, and we're all gonna be scrambling, trying to figure out a solution when we had plenty of time to figure this out as an industry.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's cooperation is the key here. We're not solving some big technical challenge at the end of the day. We just need people to all march in the same line. But obviously, we need to figure out what the correct business model is that the entities kind of want to march behind. At the end of the day, which is fine. But there's going to be different kind of preferences depending on your business model and kind of how you approach the world. I guess the question becomes, what else outside of, Digitrust aside, is there a role for trade bodies like the IAB Tech Lab, 4As, et cetera, to help spur this along or maybe extend that time horizon beyond the 6 months, 12 months that we think we may have right now? Compliance programs, for example, self-regulation that would potentially kind of preclude the government from kind of overreaching and doing that on our behalf. Is that something that's reasonable, compliance programs?
Well, I mean, I think that either a public organization needs to step up and own this, and there are three candidates. There are the IAB, there's the ADTECH Consortium, and there's Prebid. Prebid is an open source organization. We don't necessarily want to manage IDs, but we want to enable publisher choice. So those are the three public organizations. So we pick one of those, or several of those, or we just let one of the private companies do it. Those are our options.
I think we've got about 15 minutes left. I can keep asking a lot of questions. These are really smart people who have opinions, so I can keep going. But I want to open it up to you guys as well. If there are any questions from the room, we can just pass the mics back, or you can just kind of stand up and talk. But I want to make sure that you guys have an opportunity to chime in here as well as and ask some questions. Are there any initial questions right now of the group? It's gonna, yeah.
Digitrust has been trying to crack the market in France for 5 years with Jordan and many other people. Now and the consequence that instead of having one global actor like FIFA is regulating football in the world, IAB kind of, in my opinion, should be regulating this thing for the ADTECH world. Consequence that instead of having one actor, you mentioned there is maybe 15 of them today. So how do you explain the fact that, I know it's one big question, but how do you explain that inertia which happened in the last 5 years? Because now you say, the clock is ticking. Basically, if we don't do anything within 6 months, we're going to be facing a lot of serious issues. Why nothing happened in 5 years?
I have some thoughts there. I think it's a chicken-egg problem. You need a widely distributed ID for publishers to see ROI. And in order to have a widely distributed ID, you need platforms to cooperate with each other. And they all have proprietary models that are, in essence, competing with each other right now. Well, not proprietary models, but different models that are competing with each other right now. And so publishers are stuck waiting for an ID to be used to help them monetize their content. Buyers are waiting for an ID to be propagated so they can reach larger audiences and handle measurement and attribution, et cetera. But ultimately, it's the platforms that need to start behaving with each other in order to start syncing some ID, whether it's the Digitrust ID, the TradeDesk ID, what have you. That's my own personal opinion. It's more of a cooperation problem than anything else. But folks like Prebid are doing a really great job to help facilitate the propagation component. Our CDN bill has gone through the roof since our module was implemented. So thank you, Tom. But I do think that it's a matter of a chicken and egg problem, and ultimately movement and cooperation won't really happen until the consequences are right at our doorstep.
I think it's also a kind of a business thing. Unless you have like direct impacts on your business, you can think about it. You can try to predict what's going to happen, but it's hard to know really how to act. I can take an example. For example, ad blocking. A few years ago in France, we had a massive discussion about what can we do to avoid ad blocking because it's going to happen. And ultimately, it has happened, but not so much. Like we have maybe 20, 30% ad blocking stuff on our sites, but not 50, not 90%. So to me, it's a matter of business. When you have a direct impact on your business, it's the moment you push the button. You have thought about it before, but as an industry, it's really the business impact that will force everybody to move on.
And maybe you could give some figures regarding the drop-off of ad money on Safari and Firefox.
Yes, so we lose about 40% of our revenue on Safari and Firefox. So it's something massive, but it's just a proportion of our inventory. So obviously, it's about how we can better find a solution to, as an industry, talk together. But it's also a matter of what we do, what can we provide in terms of advertising solutions to our clients if there's no tracking at all. So.
Plus, finally, those IDs, ID5, IDL, etc., they are available. They're already available. So this is just a question of subscription. The thing is, on the buy side, point of view, our point of view is we should get this still for free, because for the moment the cookie is a currency which is free, so we do not want to get a currency attached to money or something like this. And this is maybe the risk we can get with private company working on this.
I think that the fact that it's been 5 years, Julian, you're actually right, it's been a long time, and I'll express frustration amongst the entire community. This has taken too long, and we are frustrated at the pace that DigiTrust has been going. It's not fast enough. But if you look at the two models, here's the thing. DigiTrust and ID5 require publishers to act, thousands of them, thousands of publishers doing the same thing at the same time. Look at the TCF on GDPR. We couldn't even cooperate on that because the interpretations of that is like 6 different things. And we have other companies that just refuse to even join. So getting a whole bunch of publishers around the world in a bunch of countries to act in unison seems very difficult. And I'm starting to think impossible. So either we prove it's possible or we give up. The other alternative is the ADTECH consortium model, which requires no publisher action whatsoever. You can implement the module to have it written in your wrapper, but it's dropped by a buyer. That's got penetration that's really, really high. However, no buyers other than TradeDesk, or very few of them, have implemented the read of that ID. So they've got tons of penetration and no buy-side integrations. DigiTrust has very little penetration and a ton of buy-side integrations. To be a naive 6-year-old kid, can't you bring them together and use the best of both and solve the friggin' problem? I mean, that would be awesome.
Can we see something a bit like viewability, where you have private companies acting on IDs, but then have a regulator around that? You're laughing, I know, but I wanted to ask the question if that's possible. That like you have an instance, a regulator, but then private companies working like. Yeah. Can you see that coming somehow?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I can see that. I think that. We need small groups of nimble, either small consortium of publishers or independent companies to move this forward, and then it needs to transition into a public governance model. But somehow we have to take the model that DigiTrust and the IAB have created and get over this like friction point of waiting for thousands of publishers to do things. So, I mean, that could be a really good idea. Somehow, some way, we have to unlock that. We're in a logjam. We're making no progress. This is ridiculous. We have to do something. I'm to the point where we take all the ID candidates, put them in a hat, close your eyes, pick one. We do that, and that's the end. I mean, that would be better than what we're doing now.
So it's quite simple for a publisher, right, to implement several IDs at the same time through Prebid. This is what I understand.
Yeah, I think that's another problem. Sorry, I'm doing all the talking here.
Sorry as well, but I think it's interesting.
So here's the thing about I'm going to knock on Prebid, and I'm going to knock on Rubicon, and knock on a lot of people. We support it all. Our solution, like many publishers, is we'll just support them all and see what happens. This inability to take a side or take a position is actually hurting us. So you know what? Make a decision. Go all in. Step up and say, you know what? I think DigiTrust is stupid, or I think this one is stupid. I think DigiTrust is great. Make a call. And then we can debate those things and move on. But this approach that Prebid has, where we just spray every ID we can find, like boom, 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 and hope somebody adopts it, I mean, it's not helpful.
Yeah, at the same time, we need to go in the same direction somehow. So if everybody makes a different decision, then
we do not want to add more complexity. If we have to, on the buy side, to build a specific plan for a specific ID, and so a different plan for the same campaign at the end, well, this won't work. But the thing is, if the open web is not working on this at the moment, well, this will be the browser who will do the stuff, and so this will be in the hand of the consumer, meaning there is a big risk of a drop-off, cookies, inventory, etc. So money.
So key takeaway, have a point of view and spread the gospel, right, at the end of the day. I think there were a few more hands over here. Yeah.
I heard that there is a French association, Caucheteux, that had this project of unify ID across publishers. So that could be, and I have 2 questions. First, where is this initiative? Actually, where does it stand now?
Well,
The second one is, would it be a local French initiative? How does it fit to your vision, Thomas, to become something, or be a part of something bigger?
Regarding the initiative coming from Le Geste, so this is a single sign-on. There are many publishers on it, but this is not for advertising purpose. Meaning, this is no answer for the moment for this topic. So this is a very, very limited initiative regarding ad tech or ad money. But this is the beginning. So this is in the good way, in the right direction. Regarding the other question, sorry. Yeah. So there is a great news. There is one company which is French. I mean, ID5 who's working on it, but they want to spread on the European level or global level. And I think for sure there's a IAB and Tom.
Yeah, Prisma is not participating into this initiative so far, so I cannot comment on that.
I think regional solutions are not going to solve the larger problem. I think because buyers are not regional, buyers are global, and our industry is global. But I think regional solutions have a significant contribution because single sign-on for the users that you can get on single sign-on are much more valuable, and you can do much more creative and innovative things with those users than you can with a third-party ID. So you should get as much first-party as you can. The initiative here in France is great. The one in Germany, the European Net ID, is also making a lot of progress. But keep in mind, the way they map that anonymized email address is they map it with a third-party cookie. That's what they use to transmit to the rest of the industry. So the level of dependency on third-party IDs is quite high. And any solution, we need to have one global solution that works everywhere, kind of a least common denominator. Then we can add these targeted first-party logged-in user events on top of that to create a true valuable ecosystem. So I think you need both, but the initiative here in France is not going to save the world of advertising, if that's the question.
Plus, maybe in France there is maybe an opportunity coming from telco operators, because they have everything in the end to answer the question. But that's still the same, finally the same issue. It's all about, well, different guys, different competitors around the table to solve this topic.
I think we've got time for one or two other questions. Yep.
So if we're looking for a globally distributed non-profit organisation to help solve the identity crisis, and given that you guys have done a reasonably good job with the TCF, are you not ideally suited to make this, with this precipice that we need to make a decision moving forward? Why aren't you guys the IAB?
So the question is basically consensu versus the DigiTrust domain at the end of the day. Consensu meaning the namespace that the TCF sits on top of. That, in essence, that's the crux of the question.
My first question is, I mean, someone needs to make a decision, and
Yeah.
you guys are like taking a position to get people to push the industry forward.
Yeah.
So what's the issue?
Ooh, we spent a lot of time talking about the issues. But I think it ultimately, my point of view, and I think the point of view of the Tech Lab, is that it's a cooperation problem, more so than a technology problem. We have the technology in place. We have the political will to do this. It's just a matter of entities in the supply chain. We just kind of spoke about this a few questions ago. Picking a solution and driving hard towards whatever option they think is best for their business. And right now, I think a lot of the entities in the industry are kind of in a wait and see testing mode where there's some urgency at this point, given what's happening more broadly within the browser environment. And the time is up to continue testing. I think we all agree that the publisher community specifically needs to take a stand and align behind one ID namespace versus another. And we just haven't seen that quite yet, given the fact that there are perceived to be competing solutions in the marketplace. But that's my 2 cents. I'm sure these guys might have a different take.
Yeah, I think, again, like, IAB can be a regulator of what's going on. Like,
Yeah.
it's what I can see from our discussion so far.
Yeah. Did that answer the question? Somewhat? Yeah. I think we've got time for one more question. Is anyone else out there? Yeah, I saw something over here. Yeah.
So the voice will be working
So moving beyond device ID to cross-device ID, right? Maybe it's not worthwhile to focus on device right now, and we have to take that leap beyond. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And I take that even further. I'll paraphrase what you said. People who use web browsers are losers anyway. They're all going away. Who cares about computers? They're dumb. Display doesn't matter. It's all about apps and CTV anyway, so why waste your time on this stupid cookie stuff? Let's go do something important. That's my paraphrase of the question. In all seriousness, mobile app and CTV is where a big chunk of our effort needs to be. That's where users are, that users want to be reached, and there is a method for addressing those users with a resettable, persistent device-level ID. You can't cookie it, but that model is a very, very good model to follow, and that's why people talk about browser ID solutions. Here's the thing, though. The buy side needs to start to incorporate those signals more effectively, because a lot of buyers convert device IDs to their proprietary cookies when they do their target segmentation. So we haven't, as an industry, converted over to the device ID model in all of our back-end plumbing and targeting. So we need to do that. But I think there is some validity to say, you know, the browser thing's, it's a lost cause. Forget it. Let's go build something that's going to exist 5, 10 years from now. Unfortunately, a lot of people in this room are dependent on their browser money.
But maybe LiveRamp as a beginning of solution, because there are cross-device natively.
I think browser IDs are smart too. You should call the CEO of Google right now and tell him to get his act together.
All right, anything else before we wrap up here? All right then, well, thank you guys. It's been a good conversation. Appreciate it.